Welcome to Shattered Skies Stories. Please hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any sci-fi stories. Also put in the comments where you are listening in from. Now, sit back and relax. The morning air carried the familiar weight of silence as Maya stepped onto the observation deck of Tower 7. Below her, the city stretched in a maze of glass and concrete, populated by thousands who moved like ghosts through their daily routines. No voices called out to friends across the street. No children's laughter echoed from the playgrounds. The world had learned to live without sound, and Maya had never known it any other way. She pressed her palm against the cold metal railing, watching the choreographed dance of the silent city. Traffic moved in perfect synchronization, guided by elaborate light systems and hand signals from the traffic wardens who stood at every major intersection. Their gestures were sharp and precise, a complex ballet of fingers and arms that had replaced the cacophony of honking horns that her mother sometimes described in whispered bedtime stories. Maya's mother, Elena, was one of the few remaining who remembered the time before. When voices filled the air like music, when people could shout across distances and sing lullabies aloud. Elena had been 22 when the silence fell, young enough to adapt but old enough to grieve for what was lost. She'd taught Maya the old words for things that no longer existed: conversation, argument, song. Words that felt foreign on Maya's tongue during their rare private moments when speech was safe. The virus, officially designated as mutis mortem by the Global Health Council, had swept across the world 23 years ago with the efficiency of wildfire. Those who tried to speak after infection died within hours, their throats swelling shut, their lungs filling with fluid. The survivors learned quickly: silence meant life. Maya turned from the railing and walked toward the elevator bank, her footsteps muffled by the soft polymer flooring that covered every surface in the city. Sound dampeners had become as essential as oxygen in the new world. Even accidental noises, a dropped book, a slammed door, a sneeze, could trigger the virus in those still carrying dormant strains. The medical authorities claimed that 90% of the population still carried mutis mortem, kept in check only by absolute vocal silence. The elevator arrived with a gentle vibration rather than a chime. Maya stepped inside and pressed the button for the 40th floor, where she worked as a memory keeper in the Department of Historical Preservation. It was considered an important job, one that required her unique ability, though she'd never told anyone the full extent of what she could do. Officially, memory keepers used advanced neural scanning technology to help preserve the experiences of the before generation. They would place sensor nets on volunteers' heads and record their memories of the old world: what music sounded like, how people laughed, the way lovers whispered sweet words in the darkness. These recordings were stored in vast digital libraries, meant to preserve human culture for future generations. But Maya didn't need the machines. She'd discovered her ability at age 7 when she'd accidentally brushed against Mrs. Chen's hand while helping her with groceries. Suddenly, Maya was experiencing Mrs. Chen's memory of her wedding day 35 years earlier, the taste of cake, the feeling of silk against skin, and most vividly, the sound of her husband's voice saying, "I do." It had been Maya's first experience with human speech that wasn't her mother's careful whispers. Over the years, she'd learned to control the ability to pull specific memories from people with just a touch. But she'd also learned to hide it. The government was suspicious of anyone with unusual capabilities, especially those that couldn't be easily explained or replicated. Maya had seen too many people with anomalous traits disappear into the Department of Special Research, never to return. The elevator doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing the familiar sight of the historical preservation floor. Dozens of workstations were arranged in neat rows, each equipped with the bulky neural scanning equipment and comfortable chairs for the volunteers. Maya's colleagues moved between the stations like silent dancers, their hands speaking in the fluid gestures of new sign, the standardized sign language that had emerged in the years after the silence. "Good morning, Maya," signed Dr. Marcus Webb, her supervisor. His movements were sharp and efficient, betraying his military background from the before times. "We have a special assignment today. High priority from the council." Maya nodded and signed back. "What kind of assignment?" "Elder council member wants a personal session. Very specific memories requested, his childhood before the silence. Standard rate, but expedited timeline." Dr. Webb's expression was carefully neutral, but Maya caught the slight tension in his shoulders. The Elder Council rarely interacted directly with memory keepers. They usually sent assistants or intermediaries. "Which council member?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Thaddeus Kane." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's climate control. Thaddeus Kane was the most powerful member of the Elder Council, the governing body that had emerged in the years after the silence. He was also one of the most feared. Rumors spoke of dissidents who questioned government policies simply vanishing in the night, of families relocated without explanation. Kane had been instrumental in establishing the strict sound regulations that governed every aspect of daily life. "When?" She signed. "Now. He's waiting in Private Room 3. Private Room 3 was reserved for high-security sessions, isolated from the main floor by sound dampeners and signal blockers. Maya had only been inside once before, when she'd worked with a former military official who claimed to have classified memories from the early days of the virus response. Maya gathered her standard equipment, though she wouldn't need it, and made her way through the maze of corridors toward the private wing. Her heart rate increased with each step. She'd spent years carefully avoiding direct contact with government officials, knowing that her ability would make her a valuable and therefore dangerous asset if discovered. The corridor leading to Private Room 3 was lined with security cameras and motion sensors. Maya's identification badge granted her access through 3 separate checkpoints before she finally reached the heavy steel door marked with a simple 3. She pressed her palm to the biometric scanner, and the door slid open with barely a whisper. Inside, the room was larger than she'd expected, furnished with expensive leather furniture and walls lined with books. Actual paper books, a luxury in the post-silence world where digital text had largely replaced physical media. Thaddeus Kane sat in a wingback chair near the window, his back to the door. Even from behind, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair that caught the morning light. He wore the formal gray robes that marked his rank in the Elder Council, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb sound itself. Maya cleared her throat softly, one of the few sounds considered safe in small quantities, and Kane turned to face her. His eyes were the color of winter storms, and his face bore the kind of deep lines that came from years of carrying heavy decisions. He was perhaps 60, old enough to remember the before clearly, young enough to have adapted fully to the new world. "Ms. Rivera," he signed, his movements precise and formal. "Thank you for accommodating this unusual request." "Of course, Counselor Kane," Maya replied, setting down her equipment case with deliberate care. "What specific memories are you hoping to preserve?" Kane rose from his chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the silent city below. "My childhood. The sounds of my mother's voice, specifically. She died during the first wave of infections, and I find that my memories of her voice are fading." There was something in his posture that made Maya pause. In her experience, people requesting memory preservation were usually eager, sometimes desperate to share their recollections. Kane seemed reluctant, almost pained by the prospect. "Would you prefer to begin with the standard neural scanning, or do you have a specific approach in mind?" Maya asked, though she already knew she would need to touch him to access his memories directly. The machines could only capture surface thoughts and deliberate recollections. To find deep, buried memories, especially emotional ones, required direct contact. "I've heard that you have a particularly intuitive approach to memory work," Kane signed, turning back to face her. "Less reliance on machinery, more on personal connection." Maya's blood chilled. How much did he know about her abilities? I sometimes find that direct contact helps establish better rapport with the subject, she replied carefully. It can help focus the neural scanners more effectively. Kane nodded and returned to his chair. Please, proceed however you think best. Maya approached slowly, activating the neural scanning equipment to maintain the pretense. She adjusted the sensor net and prepared the recording systems, all while planning how to make the physical contact seem natural and professional. If you could place your hands on the armrests, she instructed, I'll need to check the sensor placement. As Kane complied, Maya leaned forward to adjust the sensors around his temples. Her fingers brushed against his wrist for just a moment, barely a second of contact, but it was enough. The world exploded into sensation and memory. Maya found herself standing in a laboratory filled with gleaming equipment and the antiseptic smell of chemicals. But this wasn't her memory, she was experiencing Kane's recollections, seeing through his eyes as a much younger man. He was perhaps 30, wearing a lab coat over casual clothes, his hair still dark brown. The vocal cord targeting is almost perfect, said a woman's voice beside him. Maya turned Kane's head and saw a striking brunette in her 40s, Dr. Sarah Chen according to the nameplate on her desk. The virus homes in on the larynx with surgical precision. Speech triggers the lethal inflammatory response within minutes. And the carrier state? Kane's younger self asked, his voice clear and strong in the memory. Stable in 97% of subjects. They can carry and spread the virus indefinitely as long as they remain silent. It's elegant, really, a perfect compliance mechanism. Maya felt Kane's satisfaction in the memory, a cold pride that made her stomach turn. She tried to pull back from the connection, but the memory held her fast. Timeline for deployment? Kane continued. The aerosol distribution system is ready. We can achieve global saturation within 6 months using the existing climate modification networks. The beauty is that by the time symptoms manifest in the first wave, the virus will already be everywhere. And the antidote? Dr. Chen smiled, an expression that chilled Maya to the bone. Locked away and ready for selective distribution. We'll control who gets treated and who doesn't. A perfect tool for population control and social reorganization. The memory shifted, jumping forward several months. Maya saw Kane standing in a command center filled with screens showing global infection rates. Maps lit up in red as country after country fell silent. She felt his satisfaction at the efficiency of their plan, the way governments had crumbled as communication broke down, the ease with which the Elder Council had stepped in to restore order. Another memory fragment, Kane in a secure facility, watching scientists destroy vials of pale blue liquid, the antidote. She felt his certainty that this was necessary, that the silence had created a better world, more peaceful, more controllable. The old world was chaos, his mental voice echoed in the memory. All that noise, all that discord. We've given humanity something better, order, discipline, purpose. Maya tried desperately to break the connection, but the memories kept flowing. She saw Kane's rise to power in the post-silence world, his careful cultivation of the myth that the virus had been a natural disaster, his systematic elimination of anyone who remembered or suspected the truth. And then she saw her mother. Elena Rivera stood in chains before a younger Kane, her eyes blazing with defiance. She was thinner than Maya remembered her, her face marked by fear and exhaustion. You know what you created, Elena signed desperately. You have to release the cure. People are dying, families are destroyed. People are learning, Kane signed back coldly. Learning that silence is better than chaos. Your daughter will grow up in a world without the noise and violence that plagued our generation. Maya is only 5 years old, Elena pleaded. She'll never hear her mother's voice, never sing a lullaby to her own children. She'll be grateful for the peace, Kane interrupted. As will her children, and their children after them. The memory shifted again, and Maya saw her mother being led away, her face turned back toward Kane with a look of pure hatred. Then the memory dissolved, and Maya found herself back in the present, gasping for air as she stumbled backward from Kane's chair. The elder counselor was watching her with cold calculation, his storm-gray eyes measuring her reaction. "You saw something interesting," he signed, not a question but a statement. Maya's hands shook as she tried to respond. The neural scanners detected some anomalous patterns. Perhaps we should. Stop lying, Kane signed sharply, rising from his chair. I know exactly what you can do, Maya Rivera. Your ability to read memories through touch has been known to us for years. Maya backed toward the door, but it had locked automatically when the session began. She was trapped. Your mother never told you how she really died, did she? Kane continued, advancing slowly. Elena Rivera was one of the last members of the resistance, people who remembered the truth about the virus and wanted to expose it. She died because she refused to stop fighting for a cure that would destroy everything we'd built. Maya's mind raced. Her mother had told her she'd died in a medical facility, succumbing to complications from the virus. It had been one of the few conversations where Elena had broken the rules and actually spoken aloud, whispering the words in Maya's ear as she lay dying in their small apartment. The world is better now, Kane signed, his movements taking on an almost hypnotic rhythm. No wars fought over miscommunication. No hate speech, no lies spread by silver tongues, no demagogues rallying crowds to violence. The silence has brought us peace. You've brought us slavery, Maya finally managed to sign, her hands steadying as anger replaced fear. You've stolen humanity's voice and convinced them to be grateful for it. Kane smiled. A cold expression that never reached his eyes. And you, my dear, are going to help us keep it that way. Your ability is far too valuable to waste. You'll work for the Department of Special Research, using your gift to identify other potential dissidents, to uncover any remaining pockets of resistance. I'll never help you, Maya signed fiercely. Oh, but you will, Kane replied, moving to his desk and retrieving a small tablet. He showed her the screen, which displayed a live video feed of a familiar apartment, her apartment, where she lived alone since her mother's death. But the feed showed Maya wasn't alone. Armed figures in black tactical gear stood in her living room, clearly waiting for orders. Cooperation, Ms. Rivera, or you'll join your mother in whatever passes for an afterlife these days. The choice is entirely yours. Maya stared at the screen, her mind working frantically. She thought about her mother's final whispered words. Sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply refusing to stay silent. I need time to think, she signed. Of course, Kane replied graciously. But not too much time. My patience, like the city's silence, has its limits. Kane moved to the door and entered a code on the keypad. The lock disengaged with a soft click. You're free to go, Ms. Rivera. Take the rest of the day to consider your decision. Report to the Department of Special Research tomorrow at 8 a.m., or my security team will assume you've chosen the alternative. Maya gathered her equipment with shaking hands and walked toward the door. As she reached the threshold, Kane's hand shot out and grasped her wrist, direct skin contact. Another flood of memories hit her, Kane meeting with other world leaders before the virus, selling them on the idea of population management through controlled communication. She saw the virus being refined in laboratories, tested on unwilling subjects, deployed through water supplies and air conditioning systems. But most importantly, she saw something Kane hadn't meant to share, a memory of just 2 days ago. Kane in another secure facility, standing before a massive vault door. Beyond the door, Maya glimpsed rows and rows of blue vials, the antidote, not destroyed as the other memory had suggested, but carefully preserved and stockpiled. The facility was in the old city, beneath the ruins of what had once been Central General Hospital. And according to the memory, Kane visited it monthly to ensure the security systems were functioning. Kane released her wrist, apparently unaware of what he'd accidentally shared. "Until tomorrow, Ms. Rivera." Maya nodded and stumbled out of the room, her mind reeling from everything she'd experienced. As she walked back through the corridors of the historical preservation facility, she passed her colleagues, good people who believed they were helping preserve human culture, unaware that they were actually helping to maintain a lie. She thought about Dr. Webb, about the volunteers who came in each day with their precious memories of the before times, about the children being born into a world where they would never hear their parents' voices. All of it built on a foundation of deliberate cruelty and control. Maya made it to her desk and sat down heavily, staring at the neural scanning equipment that had been her cover for so long. Around her, the familiar ballet of silent workers continued, their hands speaking in the language that had replaced humanity's voice. But Maya was no longer thinking about compliance or survival. She was thinking about rebellion. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, ostensibly reading a book but actually planning. The tactical team Kane had shown her was real. She'd spotted them through her window when she'd arrived home, professional watchers who thought they were invisible but made themselves obvious to someone who knew what to look for. She had perhaps 12 hours before Kane expected her decision. 12 hours to figure out how to expose the truth about the virus and locate the antidote, or to disappear forever into the government's detention facilities. Maya pulled out a secure tablet, one of the few pieces of technology her mother had left her, and began composing a message. If she was going to rebel, she wouldn't do it alone. The message was addressed to Dr. Marcus Webb, but written in a code she and her mother had developed years earlier, disguised as a routine work report. Maya knew that Dr. Webb was more than he appeared. She'd glimpsed fragments of his memories during accidental contact, memories of resistance meetings and hidden communications with others who suspected the truth. "Dr. Webb," she wrote in the encoded message, "I've discovered something that changes everything. The preservation work we've been doing, it's not what we thought. I have proof that the silence wasn't natural, and I know where they're hiding the cure. We need to meet tonight. The old subway tunnel, Junction 7, midnight. Come alone, and bring anyone else you trust with the truth. This is our chance to give humanity its voice back." Maya encrypted the message and sent it through a series of anonymous relays, then destroyed the tablet's memory core. If Kane's people were monitoring her communications, they would see only random data fragments. She spent the remaining hours preparing. From her mother's hidden cache, concealed behind a false wall in the bedroom closet, she retrieved items Elena had kept from her resistance days, detailed maps of the underground tunnel systems, codes for bypassing security systems, and most importantly, a small vial of pale blue liquid. Maya held the vial up to the light, watching the antidote swirl like liquid starlight. Her mother had kept it as proof, saving it for the day when someone would be brave enough to expose the truth. That day had finally come. At 11:30 p.m., Maya made her way through the silent streets toward the old subway entrance. The watchers followed her, but she'd expected that. She led them on a complex route through the city, using passages and maintenance tunnels her mother had shown her years earlier, until she was certain she'd lost them in the underground maze. The Junction 7 meeting point was an abandoned subway station, one of many that had been sealed after the silence when public transportation became too dangerous, too many people in enclosed spaces, too much risk of someone breaking and making noise that could trigger mass infections. Maya arrived to find she wasn't alone. Dr. Webb was there, along with 3 other people she recognized, Dr. Sarah Martinez from the medical district, Thomas Chen from the communications department, and Maya's own neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, whom Maya had always assumed was just a harmless elderly woman. "You came," Maya signed, relief flooding through her. "Your message was illuminating," Dr. Webb replied. "We've suspected the truth for years, but we needed proof." Maya told them everything: Kane's memories, the laboratory where the virus was created, the location of the antidote stockpile. She showed them the vial her mother had preserved, watching as each person's face reflected the same mixture of horror and determination. "How many others know?" asked Dr. Martinez. "More than the government realizes," Mrs. Patterson signed, her movements surprisingly sharp and military in precision. "The resistance never died, it just learned to be quieter." Over the next hour, they developed a plan. Dr. Martinez would use her medical credentials to access the hospital's old records and verify Maya's information about the antidote location. Thomas Chen would prepare to broadcast the truth through the emergency communication networks that were still functional. Dr. Webb would coordinate with other resistance cells throughout the city. And Maya would return to the old hospital, using her ability to gather more evidence and, if possible, secure samples of the antidote. "This is incredibly dangerous," Dr. Webb warned. "If Kane suspects what you're planning." "He already suspects," Maya signed back. "He's given me until tomorrow morning to join his organization or disappear. This is our only chance." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward and pressed something into Maya's hand, a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "Communication device," she explained. "We've been developing them in secret for years. It converts sign language into digital signals and back again. You'll be able to stay in contact with us even if you're separated." Maya examined the device, marveling at the engineering. "How long have you been preparing for this?" 23 years, Mrs. Patterson replied grimly. "Ever since the silence fell." They separated before dawn, each taking different routes back to their normal lives. Maya returned to her apartment to find that Kane's watchers had resumed their positions, apparently convinced she'd simply gone for a late-night walk to clear her head. Maya spent the morning maintaining her normal routine, going through the motions of considering Kane's offer while actually preparing for the mission ahead. She packed light, just the essentials she'd need for breaking into the hospital facility, along with the communication device and her mother's vial of antidote as proof. At 7 a.m., Maya left her apartment and began walking toward the Department of Special Research, maintaining the appearance of compliance. But instead of entering the government building, she slipped into an alley and quickly changed clothes, transforming from a government employee into just another maintenance worker in the gray coveralls that were ubiquitous throughout the city. The old Central General Hospital had been abandoned for over 15 years, its upper floors gutted by fire and neglect. But Maya's enhanced memories from Kane showed that the lower levels remained functional, converted into a secure storage facility for the government's most sensitive materials. Maya approached the hospital through the old delivery tunnels, using her mother's maps to navigate the maze of underground passages. The communication device buzzed softly against her ear, a signal from Dr. Webb confirming that the other resistance cells were in position throughout the city. The hospital's basement level was protected by sophisticated security systems, but Kane's memories had provided Maya with access codes and patrol schedules. She made her way through darkened corridors lined with abandoned medical equipment, following the path from Kane's memory toward the secure vault. The vault door was exactly as she'd seen it, massive, imposing, designed to withstand everything from explosions to electromagnetic pulses. But it was also designed to be opened by authorized personnel, and Kane's memory had included the biometric unlock sequence. Maya pressed her palm to the scanner and leaned forward for the retinal scan, hoping that Kane's memories had been accurate about her being added to the authorized personnel list. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the massive door began to cycle open with a deep, subsonic hum. Beyond the door lay a cathedral of secrets. Row upon row of shelving stretched away into the darkness, filled with vials of pale blue liquid, enough antidote to cure every person on Earth several times over. But there were other things too, documents detailing the virus's creation, video recordings of the decision-making process, even preserved samples of the original pathogen. Maya began gathering evidence, using a small camera to document everything while filling a backpack with vials of antidote. This was more than enough to prove the government's complicity and provide the means to begin mass treatment. As she worked, Maya's communication device buzzed with an urgent message from Thomas Chen. Security forces mobilizing throughout the city. Kane knows you're not at the department. Get out now. Maya grabbed a final handful of evidence files and headed for the vault door. But as she stepped into the corridor, she found her path blocked by a familiar figure. Thaddeus Kane stood in the hallway, flanked by 6 armed guards. His expression was one of cold disappointment rather than anger. "Ms. Rivera," he signed calmly. "I had hoped you would make the rational choice." "I did," Maya replied, clutching the backpack full of evidence and antidote. "I chose to tell the truth." Kane gestured to his guards, who raised their weapons. "The truth is a luxury this world can no longer afford. Order requires certain compromises. Order built on lies isn't order, it's tyranny. A distinction without a difference," Kane signed. "The result is the same: peace, stability, progress. The old world was ending itself with noise and chaos. We simply accelerated the process and provided a better alternative." Maya's mind raced. She was outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a corridor with no apparent escape. But she'd come too far to give up now. "You know what I find most interesting about your memories, counselor?" She signed, playing for time while her fingers found the emergency transmit button on her communication device. "You actually believe you saved the world. You've convinced yourself that stealing humanity's voice was an act of mercy." Kane's expression flickered, the first crack in his composure. "It was necessary." "It was genocide," Maya interrupted. "Cultural genocide, followed by the systematic murder of anyone who remembered the truth. Including my mother. Your mother was a terrorist who would have destroyed everything we'd built. My mother was a hero who died fighting for humanity's right to speak." Maya's passionate signing triggered something unexpected. One of Kane's guards, a young man who couldn't have been much older than Maya herself, lowered his weapon slightly, his eyes widening with recognition or perhaps memory. Kane noticed the guard's hesitation and signed sharply, "Maintain discipline, soldier." But it was too late. Maya saw her chance and took it. She lunged forward, not toward escape but toward Kane himself, her hand outstretched for direct contact. If she was going to die, she would at least share the truth with as many people as possible first. Kane tried to step back, but Maya's fingers brushed against his neck for just an instant, long enough to project the memories she'd stolen from him directly into the minds of his guards through their brief contact with their leader. The effect was immediate and devastating. 5 of the 6 guards suddenly experienced Kane's memories firsthand: the laboratory where the virus was created, the deliberate decision to withhold the cure, the systematic murder of dissidents. They saw through Kane's own eyes the moment he'd ordered Elena Rivera's execution. The guards' weapons wavered as they processed what they'd experienced. One of them, the young man who'd hesitated earlier, actually dropped his rifle entirely. "It's true," he signed with shaking hands. "Everything the resistance claimed, it's all true." Kane backed away from his own men, realizing that his authority was crumbling before his eyes. "You don't understand the bigger picture." "We understand enough," the young guard replied, then turned to Maya. "Go. Get that evidence to the broadcast stations." Maya didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted past the confused guards and through the hospital corridors, Kane's shouts of "Stop her!" echoing behind her in the form of desperate gestures. Maya emerged from the hospital into the gray dawn light to find the city in chaos. Thomas Chen had succeeded in accessing the emergency broadcast system, and the truth was spreading through every screen and display in the silent city. Maya's documentation from the vault was being transmitted alongside historical records and testimonies from resistance members throughout the city. People were emerging from their homes and workplaces, gathering in the streets with expressions of shock, anger, and something that hadn't been seen in over 2 decades, hope. Maya made her way through the crowds toward the central broadcast station, where she knew the other resistance members would be coordinating the revelation. As she walked, she began distributing vials of antidote to the people she passed, signing instructions for its use. The first person to receive the cure was an elderly man who had been standing in the street, tears streaming down his face as he watched the truth unfold on the public displays. Maya handed him a vial and signed, "Drink this. You'll be able to speak again within minutes." The man looked at the blue liquid with wonder, then back at Maya with an expression of profound gratitude. He drank the contents in one gulp, then waited. After exactly 3 minutes, the man opened his mouth and whispered, "Thank you." The words were barely audible, rusty from decades of disuse, but they carried the weight of liberation. Other people nearby heard the whisper and crowded around, desperate for their own chance at redemption. Maya continued through the city, distributing the antidote and watching as voices began to emerge from the silence. First whispers, then tentative words, then actual conversations as people remembered how to speak to one another. By the time Maya reached the broadcast station, the transformation was well underway. The streets were filled with the sound of human voices, some crying, some laughing, some simply saying their own names aloud for the first time in decades. Dr. Webb met her at the station entrance, his own voice hoarse but functional after taking the cure. "Maya. Thank God you made it out. Kane's government is collapsing, half the security forces have defected after seeing the evidence." "What about Kane himself?" Maya asked, marveling at the sound of her own voice in open air. "Arrested by his own guards. He's being held pending trial for crimes against humanity." Dr. Webb smiled, an expression that seemed strange without the accompaniment of sign language. "It's over, Maya. The silence is finally broken." Maya nodded, but her attention was already turning to the future. The cure needs to be mass-produced and distributed globally. There are billions of people who still can't speak, who don't even know yet that they have the option. "Already being coordinated," Dr. Webb assured her. "Resistance cells in every major city are working with local medical facilities. Within months, everyone who wants their voice back will be able to have it." Maya walked to the window of the broadcast station and looked out at the city below. The silence that had defined her entire life was giving way to a symphony of human voices, people calling out to friends, families reuniting across distances, children hearing their parents speak for the first time. But not everyone was celebrating. Maya could see groups of people standing apart from the crowds, their expressions uncertain or even hostile. 23 years of enforced silence had created a generation that had never known any other way of life. For some, the return of voices would be traumatic rather than liberating. "It's going to be complicated," Maya said softly. "All revolutions are," Dr. Webb replied. "But this one was necessary. Humanity deserves the right to choose its own voice." Maya thought about her mother, about Elena Rivera who had died believing that someday the truth would emerge. She thought about all the people who had suffered and died in the years of silence, and about the billions more who would now have the chance to speak again. The sound of voices was growing stronger throughout the city, not the chaos that Kane had feared, but the rich, complex harmony of human communication in all its forms. Some people were singing half-remembered songs. Others were simply talking to themselves, marveling at the sound of their own voices. Children were learning to speak for the first time, guided by parents who could finally teach them properly. Maya pulled out her mother's journal, a small notebook Elena had kept hidden throughout the years of resistance. On the final page, written in Elena's careful handwriting, were the words Maya had read countless times but never truly understood until now. "The greatest sin is not in raising your voice, but in forcing others to lower theirs. When the silence finally breaks, let it break like dawn, gradually, then all at once, bringing light to places that have been dark too long." As Maya watched the sun rise over the no longer silent city, she realized that her mother's prophecy had finally come true. The dawn had arrived, and with it, the return of humanity's most fundamental gift, the ability to speak truth to power, to sing lullabies to children, to whisper words of love in the darkness. The silent choir had found its voice at last. 3 months after the revelation. As historians were already calling it, Maya stood once again on the observation deck of Tower 7. But the city spread below her was transformed beyond recognition. The streets buzzed with conversation, markets rang with the calls of vendors, and children's laughter echoed from every playground. Not everyone had chosen to take the cure. Perhaps 10% of the population had decided to remain silent, forming quiet communities that maintained the old ways. Maya respected their choice. True freedom meant the right to choose silence as much as the right to speak. The transition hadn't been without problems. Some people found that their voices had been damaged by decades of disuse. Others struggled with anxiety or trauma related to the return of sound. The world had needed to rebuild not just its voice, but its entire approach to communication and social interaction. Cain and his co-conspirators were on trial in a new international court, facing charges of genocide and crimes against humanity. The proceedings were broadcast worldwide, with Cain's own memories, extracted through voluntary contact with Maya, serving as primary evidence against him. Maya had become something of a reluctant celebrity, known worldwide as the woman who broke the silence. But she declined most interview requests and public appearances, preferring to work quietly with the Global Restoration Committee to help coordinate the worldwide distribution of the antidote. She'd also begun training others with similar abilities. It turned out that forced evolution in response to the virus had created more people like her than anyone had realized. They called themselves memory keepers, and they worked to preserve and share the experiences of both the before times and the years of silence, ensuring that future generations would understand the full cost of surrendering their voices to those who promised safety in return. As Maya stood on the observation deck, listening to the symphony of human voices that now filled the air, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Dr. Webb approaching, his face bearing good news. The last major holdout cities have agreed to accept the cure shipments, he said, his voice still carrying traces of wonder at being able to speak openly after so many years. Tokyo, Moscow, and Sao Paulo will begin distribution next week. We estimate that within 6 months, every person on Earth will have had the opportunity to reclaim their voice. Maya nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The work was nearly complete, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been lost in those 23 years of silence, not just voices, but entire ways of being human that might never be fully recovered. What about the archives? She asked. The memories we collected during the silence years? Fully preserved and accessible, Dr. Webb assured her. The new Global Memory Project is working to integrate them with historical records from before the virus. Future generations will have the complete story, the voices we lost, the silence we endured, and the choice we made to speak again. A young girl's laughter drifted up from the street below, clear and bright against the backdrop of the city's renewed cacophony. Maya smiled at the sound. Children who had been born after the revelation would grow up never knowing the weight of enforced silence, never having to choose between truth and safety. Do you ever wonder, Maya asked quietly, what would have happened if Cain had been right? If the silence really had made the world more peaceful? Dr. Webb considered the question seriously before answering. I think peace without choice isn't peace at all, it's just another form of death. Your mother understood that. She died believing that humanity's messy, chaotic, beautiful noise was worth fighting for. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out the small vial that had started it all, the sample of antidote her mother had preserved for over 2 decades. It was empty now, its contents long since analyzed and replicated, but she kept it as a reminder of the price of freedom. She would have loved this, Maya said, gesturing toward the vibrant, noisy city below. All of it, the arguments, the singing, the children learning to say their first words. Even the chaos. Especially the chaos, Dr. Webb agreed with a smile. She always said that silence was order, but noise was life. As the sun set over the city that had learned to sing again, Maya reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been born into silence, raised to believe that safety lay in stillness, taught that voices were dangerous luxuries the world could no longer afford. But she had also been born to a mother who remembered the time before, who understood that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its ability to remain quiet, but in its irrepressible need to speak, to tell stories, to share dreams, to call out warnings, to whisper love into the darkness. The virus had been designed to steal more than just voices. It had been engineered to steal hope, to convince people that their natural instincts for communication and connection were liabilities rather than gifts. For 23 years, it had succeeded. But truth, like sound itself, was a wave that couldn't be contained forever. It found ways to travel through the smallest cracks, to resonate in unexpected places, to grow stronger rather than weaker when it encountered obstacles. Maya had been one conduit for that truth, but she hadn't been the only one. Throughout the years of silence, thousands of people had kept the memory of voices alive, in hidden journals, in secret gatherings, in the quiet rebellion of parents teaching their children to mouth words even when they couldn't speak them aloud. The resistance had never been about Maya's unique abilities or Kane's political machinations. It had been about the fundamental human refusal to accept that communication was a privilege to be granted by authorities rather than a right to be claimed by every person born into the world. Now, as voices rose from every corner of the city in a symphony of languages, dialects, and accents that would have been impossible to orchestrate, Maya finally understood what her mother had meant when she'd whispered those final words: "Sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply refusing to stay silent." The silent choir had found its voice, and it was singing a song of such complexity and beauty that no one, not Kane, not the government, not even Maya herself, could have imagined its true power. It was the sound of humanity remembering how to be human. The sound of a world learning to speak again. And in that cacophonous, glorious, perfectly imperfect chorus, Maya heard the echo of her mother's voice, finally free to sing along.